$33.1 trillion. That is the December 2023 budget deficit of the United States government. Essentially, it's the amount of debt that they have accumulated. $33.1 trillion.
$33 trillion in national debt. I mean, what have the conversations inside the Beltway sounded like as you've continued to track them?
They might print money to pay their interest. They might keep accumulating more and more debt. And to many people and many economists, it seems like a bit of a lost cause. Unlike you, and you should see this as a positive, you definitely have a balance that's dwarfed by that of the US government. I would hope so, at least. But this is a good sign. It means you can get out of debt, and you will. The only thing standing between you and getting fully out of debt is a simple set of steps to figure out how to get there and get the ball rolling. You can get out of debt. I know you can. I know I can too. Let me show you some ways that work every single time and have been thoroughly researched and tried by many people worldwide to get them out of debt very quickly and to just live a happier life. So this video was mostly inspired by an episode of Dave Ramsey.
You can wander into debt, darling. You cannot wander out. You have to get pissed off about your status quo. I make too much to be this freaking broke.
That I was listening to and actually watching on YouTube. And it involved this couple that had accumulated mass amounts of debt, both student loans, mortgage debt, and credit card debt, all of which adding up to about $320,000. Now, this might not seem too bad to some of you, but their annual income, their household income, was only about $60,000. So there's this huge gap, and they felt like they had to work for years, maybe even decades, to get out of debt. But using the different methods that I'm going to talk about today, they were able to work very hard and get out of debt so much more quickly than they'd even hoped to do. And soon enough, all that cash flow that was being paid into paying off their loans was then able to just be rerouted into their lifestyle, and they were able to save and invest.
$297,000 paid off in 19 months, making $302. Count it down. Let's hear a debt-free scream.
3, 2, 1. We're debt free!
It goes to show that for you and anybody else, it's completely possible to do so. Now, what I also found from this story that was very interesting is what happens when you have this huge amount of debt you have to pay off. You have this monthly payment that you're making towards those debts, and then that forces you to live below your means, which was definitely the case of this couple. They had to live well below their means, spend almost nothing except on the bare essentials in order to get by and pay off that debt. But in the end, they had all this extra cash flow that they can then invest or save into an emergency fund because they'd learned to live off such a small amount of money. All right, so the first method that I'm going to talk about today is kind of a prerequisite for the other strategies I'm going to be talking about, and that is to minimize your interest rates. Now, of course, there's various ways to do this. You have things like credit cards, mortgages, and auto loans that are notorious for having very high rates, especially in this environment when interest rates are sky high. And for these types of loans, you want to make sure that you're either shopping around to get the best rates if you really need to do this, or even refinancing if you really, really have to. But if it's something like a credit card, you should consider getting a line of credit if at all possible, and paying off the balance of your credit card if you're not able to pay it in full. The reason for this is because lines of credit typically have interest rates that are a little bit higher than the interest rates in the economy, meaning they are going to be 12 to 13% lower than what the credit card company or bank is charging you. So if you can pay off your credit card with this line of credit, it'll significantly reduce the amount of interest you have to pay and make it a lot quicker to pay off your debt. Another way that you can easily get rid of a very high interest rate on a credit card is something that you might have heard of before, and it's called a balance transfer. So essentially what this is transferring the balance of your credit card to another credit card that has a promotion for maybe a 0% interest rate for an entire year, or maybe just a credit card that has a much lower interest rate. Now, this does charge you a fee of between 3 to 5% of the balance that you're transferring, but of course this ends up being so much less than what you'd be paying in interest if you had to pay off that credit card over an extended period of time, with interest accruing that entire time. In the example that we have a promotion of a 0% interest rate for 1 year, and you really just go balls to the wall and pay off that credit card as much as you humanly can in that single year, you're gonna pay so much more principal because you don't have to pay any interest at all, and it'll pay off your debts so much more quickly. All right, so now into the meat and potatoes, and that is the second method that we're gonna be talking about, and that is to pay off the smaller balances first. If you have multiple different kinds of debt, it might be very confusing as to which you should pay first, and there's two separate ways that we're gonna look at today on how to approach this. The first is what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball method, and as he notoriously says, personal finance is 80% behavior and 20% knowledge.
Personal finance is 80% behavior. It's only 20% head knowledge. People change their lives when they finally say, "I've had it!"
So this goes to show that your behavior is a very important part of personal finance and of paying off debt as well. So the debt snowball acts as this psychological and behavior method that allows you to pay smaller balances first. It might not be the most efficient in terms of paying off your debt the most quickly, but it does help to build momentum and build a habit of paying off debt every single month. And that's because, again, you're starting with those smaller balances. So say if you had a medical bill that was $1,500 that you needed to pay off, regardless of the interest rate, you would pay that off first if it's your smallest loan. And once you pay off that $1,500, it's gonna feel great because you can use that minimum payment or whatever amount you were allocating to paying off that medical bill to that next debt that you want to tackle. As you increase the balances of the different kinds of loans you're tackling, it's going to become easier and easier to pay them off as well. And this is because you're carrying over those extra payments that you had on those previous smaller loans, and you're putting those towards the bigger loans, so it's compounding and becoming much easier to pay those off. Again, I just want to emphasize here that everything comes back down to habits, and really the debt snowball method is made for you to build a habit of paying off debt consistently. And once you build that habit, it becomes so much easier to do it all the time and to just set that money aside no matter what and just pay off that debt. So starting with those small balances makes it so much easier to do this. The third method that I want to talk about is closely related to the debt snowball, and I like to call it eating your frogs first, but really this is the debt avalanche method, and it's also something that Dave Ramsey is quite fond of. Quite the opposite of the debt snowball method, this is the most efficient way to pay off your debts. It will pay them off the quickest, but it will be a little bit harder to keep that momentum, and that's because you're typically going to be tackling the largest interest rate debt first. That being said, you want to make sure that these larger interest rate loans, you're throwing a lot of money at it and putting all of the other loans on minimum payments so that you can simply throw as much as you can into this loan. You also want to make sure that you've reduced that interest rate through what we talked about before, either by using a line of credit to pay it off so you have a lower interest rate, or you want to do a balance transfer if we're talking about a credit card, which likely is the case because those are typically the highest interest rates that you'll have. The way I like to look at this is say if you have 5 different loans, let's make it simple here and say that all the minimum payments are $50. That means that your 5 loans are going to be $250 if you pay the minimum payment on all of them. But if you want to pay off that first one a little bit more quickly, you're going to apply that $50 for the minimum payment plus the remaining $250. So $300 you're going to apply to that first loan, the highest interest rate loan first, and then you're going to apply that full $300 plus the additional $50 to the next loan. So essentially here, you're taking the minimum payment and the extra amount you can allocate to paying off that first loan, and you're just gonna carry over that full payment once you're done paying off that loan to the next loan in line, which is the next highest interest rate, and so on until you've paid off each loan. And of course, it becomes easier too, because you're putting more and more money towards paying it off. And just as a bonus here, I wanted to mention really quickly, there are certain instances where you might have zero interest, which I know in Canada, student loans are currently no interest at all. Or you might be lucky enough to have a family member or a friend that gives you a loan free of interest.
My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
And this is a very privileged position to be in. You should be very happy. And in this case, it might be a little bit trickier to figure out if you should pay that off first or if you should focus on other loans you might have. If it's something like a student loan, which I currently have, I honestly just pay the minimum payment because there is currently no interest rate associated with that student loan. And being the economist that I am, I know that over time, inflation will do its thing.
$56.75, that can't be right.
Actually, you know what, you're right, that's not right.
That's what I thought.
It's $300.
What?
Well, it was $56.75, but because of inflation, it went up to $300.
That's ridiculous.
Just went up another $300, so you might want to purchase quick.
Okay, all right, fine.
And reduce the value of the loan. So although my payoff date is quite far in the future, given that I keep earning more as well and inflation keeps pace, it's going to be a lot less that I have to pay off over time. If you have a parent or a family member or a friend that offered to give you a personal loan with no interest, this is awesome, but make sure you have like a set payment to pay them every month, kind of like a minimum payment, but maybe a little bit higher just to pay them back a little bit more quickly since they are deciding to help you out, if that's at all possible, of course. And make sure you have a contract in place because this can really help just to make them feel a little bit more secure and for you also to keep you on track and make sure you're keeping pace with those payments. And again, personal finance is all about behavior. So if you're someone who really would just prefer to have no debt whatsoever, even if it is a 0% interest rate, by all means do that first. Pay it off, get it over with, and then start saving and investing. But I personally choose not to do this and invest while I have a 0% interest rate and just make those minimum payments. Well, it's become quite clear that getting out of debt depends on two things, and that is 1, your personality, and 2, the different kinds of interest rates. First, you want to make sure you can get rid of all high interest rate debt by doing a balance transfer or getting a line of credit or other form of cheap debt to pay off high interest debt. If you then need extra motivation and you want to really build a habit of paying off debt, you can move to the debt snowball method and do it that way by paying the smallest balances first. Or you can simply start with the debt avalanche method and pay down the highest interest rate if you already have a secure feeling that you're able to pay things on a regular basis. That's fantastic, and then go right to the debt avalanche. And you can even make a bit of a hybrid approach as well. You can start with the debt snowball, build a bit of a habit over a month or two, and once you feel like you've really got it down and you won't miss any payments, simply switch to the debt avalanche method and do it that way. And after you've taken care of this debt resolution and you've got your debt under control, you might want to learn how to get that credit score back up. And I've got a video right here that'll teach you how to get an 850 credit score. Make sure to check that out. See you guys next time.